Hey everyone, welcome to this live stream, if you will. And you see the title right there. I'm also trying out something different with OBS Studio, so bear with me while I do this. um, but yeah, as you can see there, this is something that I was thinking about because I got to give a shout out to Fantastic Samtastic, who has his own YouTube channel. And he talks a lot about Sonic and a lot of a lot of the storylines that go on with Sonic, whether it's the games, whether it's the comics or something. But he also talks about other stuff like Turtles and Mario and stuff. But yeah, he does touch upon Sonic. In fact, the recent one he talked about was Sonic 72, which was a comic book done in a manga-like style, where basically where the end was the beginning of the book, and the beginning was the end of the book, something like that. But that's not what I wanted to talk about, and all that. That's not what I wanted to talk about, because even though he talks about some of the strangeness and the weirdness from Archie Sonic, if you will, he does touch upon something else. He does touch upon something else, and it's like I said, you can see the text right there. He touches upon the Mecha Sally arc. That's right. He did this about 3 months ago, I assume. 3 months ago, he talked about it, and he called it one. And the title of it is Mecha Sally is one of the darkest Archie Sonics or Archie Sonic comics, that they've done, and it's part of his Archie Sonic history. Um, I guess yeah, it's Archie Sonic history deal. And he isn't the only one that does it. He has some other people that help him out as well. But yeah, Mecha Sally is considered, from what he said, one of the darkest Archie Sonic's arcs in history of the book. And he wouldn't be lying. He would not be lying. But you know what? Here's what's funny. Here's what's funny. He's not alone in that. He's not alone in it, if you will. He's not alone whatsoever. As a matter of fact, um, he even touches upon the fact that just like a lot of folks, he got bored with with the arc. He kind of got bored with it a little bit as it went on. He got really bored with the arc as it was progressing, and I don't think you can blame him because, as I've mentioned before, on several occasions, it was always rinse and repeat with the story arc. It was just rinse and repeat time after time, with Sonic and Amy and Tails going after Sally as this, what was it, Team Fighter thing or Team Freedom thing. Well, the other half of this, I guess you could say this mishmash of what's left of the Freedom Fighters, the amalgamation, stayed in Knothole. So you had, like I said, you had Amy, Tails, and Sonic, going after the Death Egg and trying to rescue Sally and stuff to restore her. And it was just a basic rinse and repeat. I mean, Fantastic basically said that even though it started out good, over time he just got bored with it. He was getting bored with it, time after time after time. It's like nothing was ever really changing with the story. It was just the same rinse and repeat situation as we had seen before. And honestly, I don't think anybody could blame him for that because that's what it did feel like. It felt like it was just the same thing over and over again. It's like you could not get away from it. Honestly, you could not get away from basically reading the same stuff over and over. I mean, yeah, some things changed, to make things more interesting and all that, but it just felt very repetitive. You know, it felt like, okay, you're reading an issue and you're like, okay, when is something going to pick up here? When are we going to get some action here? When are we going to get something good, something interesting that's going to, keep us invested? And truth is, we never got that. We never really got that until the end, until we got closer to the end, until we got closer to 250, when basically you had Ian Flynn. And everybody's looked at this as either, okay, that's a nice, unique callback to something from the very start of the comics, shows Ian the fan and all that. But also you have people like Cyberpunk Jordan, potentially like Fantastic Samtastic, and even someone like Crystal Maiden, and I'm sure Mega Beatman of True Mega Beatman's True Blue Reviews, all kind of this looking at, Ian Flynn's answer to how to potentially restore Sally, and the reaction obviously is very telling because they look at that, this Krazud, this Kudzu, Krazud, making a return after all this time. And never once was it ever hinted at, even from the beginning, that it could help with derobotization. And yet now it's being brought into the picture as a potential cure for Sally. And as we see in the Archie Sonic Online continuation, which basically picks up where the original continuity was basically ripped from us because of the lawsuit behind the scenes between Ken Penders and Archie, you know, basically, it worked. It actually worked. But still, people look at that, and even without that, online continuation by Archie Sonic Online, people still look at it like, had things not been interrupted the way they were, if this was, if this was indeed the end result that Ian was looking at as being the cure. Now, despite, what you may think as well, or who you might want to believe, others have kind of come out and said that there were different ideas, different scenarios being thought up by the writing crew. Basically the notes that were being passed along from the writing crew to the artist and all that. And one of the ideas that they decided that they were going to come up with when it came to Sally, and Cyberpunk Jordan's touched upon this, others have touched upon this, and I think I've talked about it, is that the original idea was the Sally that would get rescued and restored would actually be a sleeper agent. And I'm not saying this is fact, but I can almost guarantee a lot of fans, once they heard that being the potential idea that they may have decided to go with or were considering going with, the thought process was, weren't we there before? Weren't we there before with something similar? And it's like, why would you want to go there again? It did not make any sense to them. It did not make any sense. So, thankfully, even if the comic would have continued, it didn't look like, in my opinion, they were going to go through with that. Instead, I think what Archie Sonic Online has done recently is, I would say, almost similar to what Ian Flynn probably had planned. Like, she was going to come back, she was going to be restored, maybe with a new look and everything, but she was going to go through a lot of post-traumatic, trauma, but a lot of PTSD, if you will, because of what she became and what she had done under a man's control. It's like basically she would have so much trauma piled onto her because she was basically destroying everything that she stood for. And Archie Sonic Online, in my opinion, basically was going down that path. Not Archie Sonic Online, but I'm trying to link this up at certain places. I do apologize. But basically, to me, it seemed that Ian Flynn was going down that path, and Archie Sonic, obviously, Archie Sonic Online, the crew there, obviously noted that and went in that direction themselves. So, so again, thankfully, we didn't get the whole sleeper agent deal, but it definitely looked like Ian was going to go down the path that ASO just recently has done over the past couple of years with their release of the yearly um, issues, yearly continuations of the original continuity. But you know when you look back at this arc, one, it's hard to believe that this time frame right now, November 2022 and into December next month, will mark 11 years since it began, and then next spring, May and April of 2023, will mark a decade since it ended. Yeah, it'll mark a decade since it ended, and if I'm right, because of the way things were structured with Worlds Collide, you had issues coming out almost left and right for about 4 months. You know, you have June, July, August, September. It's going to be a decade next year in September, around August, September, when the retcon, the reboot, if you will, um, you know, basically made its debut. It'll be that long. When it comes to the retcon, the reboot, soft or otherwise, made its debut. But between this time frame makes it 11 years since the whole arc began, and next spring in 2023, again, we're at 11 years. We're looking back at 11 years since this arc, became reality, and then next spring we're looking at 10 years since it ended. Yeah, some might say it ended abruptly, and that's true. It did end abruptly. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that whatsoever. I'm not denying it whatsoever. But you know, a lot of people will look at this arc, and they will say to themselves, why, why did you even go with it? You know, why even go in this direction? I mean, look, when we look at something like, let's say, the Metal Virus arc, yeah, it was a very dark arc, especially during the early run of IDW Sonic, which is kind of a you know crazy thing to say, but it's true. It it did take place in the early run of IDW Sonic, and it's considered one of the darker arcs that they've had, if not the darkest arc at that time. And here's the thing: just like with Mecha Sally, it started out good. It started out terrific in some people's eyes, but then it just went downhill because it was just like rinse and repeat. As I've talked about before, and others have touched upon this too. You would have every once in a while a major game character get infected and become a zombot themselves, but every now and then it was a minor background character created just for the comics. I mean, like for example, like in one issue you would have Vanilla get infected, become a zombot, and then several issues later you would have a majority of the chaotics get infected. And it was just rinse and repeat until we got to the end. And you know, I've mentioned this before in some of my videos. I get Ian Flynn has always, and it's the same for any writer, any comic book writer or novelist or whatever. You know, I get they want to create that magnum opus. They want to create that story that they're going to be remembered for. Basically, it's the story that basically they put the stamp they basically put the seal of approval, the stamp on to state, I'm here, I'm here now. This is my world now, and you guys that are reading the comics are just living in it. So, I can understand that he's the kind of guy that wants that. I get it. You know, I mean, be honest, if I was him, I was in his shoes, I'd probably want the same thing. I'd probably want to, try have my goal be to write my own magnum opus, and even if it means taking a major character like, let's say, a Sally Acorn and doing what he did, even though I should know it's not the smartest thing to do. But again, I think what it was is that he looks at what not Ian Flynn, but what Ken Penders did. And despite what you feel about Ken Penders and what he caused the comic to go through behind the scenes, when he did that 4 issue run with Endgame, initially thinking that was the end of the comic, basically, in reality, unbeknownst to him, even though the comic would continue, he created a magnum opus. He created a masterpiece of a story that people still enjoy and read to this day. Yeah, people still enjoy and read to this day. And, a lot of folks, believe it or not, I look at all the comic dubs out there. I look at all the comic dubs. And not once have I ever, and this is the truth, have I ever seen, adrenaline dubs or others that are known to do comic dramas and take the stories and turn them into motion comics. Never once have I ever noticed them, go out and do or attempt to do a comic drama on Endgame because it's that good. It's that good, and they don't want to probably try to insult, the intelligence of that comic by trying to um, dramatize it as a comic drama or a motion comic. It's that good. And Ian Flynn, let's be honest, he was a fan at the time. He was a fan, and being a fan, he wanted basically to potentially create his own story that was on the same level, if not, broke the bar that Endgame set, or set, I should say, broke the bar that Endgame set. And you know, when you look at what he tried to do with Other M, along with fellow fans like Jay Foxfire providing artwork and all that, he used Other M, in my opinion, as a testing ground to see whether or not, not only would fans be interested in a darker Sonic story, but if fans would be interested in him creating a magnum opus that would be remembered by the fans for years to come. And again, I think if you go back and you look at at Endgame, it it basically shows that that could have been his inspiration, which is why we got the Mecha Sally arc the way we did. Why it was dark but also repetitive. That's why we had Metal Virus arc in IDW the way it was, dark and repetitive, because he was trying to create something that, even though he knew probably he had to change things up once in a while to continue to keep the interest in the investment the fans had, in the book, in the story, continuing, he knew he had to do things to change things up, which is why once in a while when it came to the Metal Virus arc, you know, he would he would basically um, you know have a major character get infected. That's what he would do. That's what he would do. But again, just like with the Mecha Sally arc, people were bored with it. I even stated one time in a video that it seemed when Mega Beatman did his review on it that he felt bored. He felt bored with it. Yeah, it felt like you could hear it in his voice. Like he was happy. He was happy, if you will, that it was finally coming to an end. It was over because I think he saw it was dragging down as well, and that's what a lot of people saw with Mecha Sally. That it started out good, but it started to drag, and you can't have something like that in a story like this where you want to keep fans in interest and investment going strong. You know, I still retain that what one fan did on DeviantArt, as a picture, let me see if I can find it. And I do apologize for any lag that may occur. I do apologize for that. Um, but there was an image. I'm gonna see if it pops up here. It was an image. Um, basically, where again, I'm gonna see if it pops up here. Let's see if it pops up here. Let's see. Trying to find it. Trying to find it. Hold on. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Trying to find it here. Hold on, guys. Let's see if I can find it. Might have to. I may have to put something else in here to search for it. But let me see. It's in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. I'm trying to find it. Let's see. I know it's in here somewhere. Again, I do apologize for any lag and everything that's going on. I think it's in here. I think it's in here somewhere. Yeah, I think it's in here somewhere. Let me see. Let me see. Trying to find it. I don't know. I think I know what to do. Hold on. I have to do that. See what's going on. I'm trying to find it here. But anyway, there is a. Oh, here it is. It's right here. It's by Ace of. It's by Ace of Speed. I'll put the link in the I'll put the link here in the super chat so you guys can look at it. But this is by Ace of Speed. You can find it here in the super chat. Um, but this image basically is mainly what a lot of people feel could have made things a lot more interesting if you would have had Sally get so far gone thanks to Eggman because he was just so so obsessed with beating Sonic and the Freedom Fighters, not realizing that the person he's weaponized is now turning against him and becoming basically a female version of Neo Metal Sonic from Sonic Heroes when he became Metal Sonic Overlord. So it basically if they would have done something like that, and again the link is in the description, you guys, in this not in the description but in the soup in the chat box in the live chat, you can check it out for yourself. Click on it if you want. If they would have done something like that, I think the interest would have been much higher because now it's like, okay, Sonic and the Freedom Fighters are in a predicament to where they might have no other choice but to destroy Sally and, basically not be able to bring her back because she's now in this form. She's evolved. But, they never did that. They never did that. And, now basically, you know, that kind of potential would probably never be seen ever again. But if they would have done something like that in the eyes of a lot of folks, I think that would have garnered a lot more interest. It would have kept things more fresher, if you will, if they would have done something like that. But again, it just shows you that fans saw, like Ace of Speed, saw basically that this was getting just a little too repetitive in its storytelling, just a little too repetitive. And here's what's interesting too. Here's what's interesting too. You you look at the fact that yes, they had Nicole redirect the roboticizing beam on the Death Egg, but I've always stood by but the fact that if she could redirect it on the Death Egg, then why didn't Sally in the story probably have her redirected, not really on the Death Egg, but basically into the sky itself, so that the blast doesn't hit nothing in particular but just sky, and the sky doesn't get really that much affected, if you will. It's like a waste. Why didn't they do something like that? And I guess we'll never know. I guess we'll never know. But that that to me was that to me is always like, if they would have done something like that, you could have avoided this. You could have avoided this. But they didn't do it. They decided to go with with Sally sacrificing herself. And as I and others have pointed out, yeah, the sacrifice was memorable, and it showed how much of a good heart Sally had, to the point that she took the second chance at life and said, you know what, I'm gonna make up for all the mistakes I made, you know, after I broke up with Sonic and everything. I'm gonna make up for all the mistakes I've made towards him, towards the kingdom. I'm gonna take the second chance of life and I'm gonna give it back. I'm gonna give it back to the people. I'm gonna give them the freedom to try to live, you know, without this threat, looming above them anymore. So she basically took the blunt of it. She took the sacrificial hit for it. But again, even though it was a great emotional moment, it it was just a moment that didn't need to be. It didn't need to be, because it's like, one, you knew fans were not going to react right. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, fans were cool with that at first because they're like, okay, this is different. We didn't expect this. But over time, it just became like, well, what's really going on with it? What's her purpose and everything? And like I mentioned earlier, had they done something like what Ace of Speed showed in that picture that I provide the link of in the live chat, had they done something like that, you know, yeah, things might have been more interesting and intriguing, but that never happened. And the fact that all it really was in the end was just basically Ian Flynn's way of finally, when you really think about it, answering the whole who's the traitor thing, who's the traitor of the freedom fighters that, Silver is looking for, when pretty much we all knew the answer. We knew the answer was going to be Sally, whether we liked it or not. Now, how we would get to that is, was an entirely different question. And obviously, the answer was, yeah, she's going to be a traitor, but she's going to be one that's unwilling. Unwilling in her actions. Like, it's kind of like, to quote what Uncle Chuck says, in in Sonic Conversion, after he's de-roboticized temporarily. He tells Sonic he's been waiting for the moment to finally be flesh and blood again since the first day he was roboticized. And when Sonic asks him, but you have, but how? And Uncle Chuck's answer is, you know, I, you know, Uncle Chuck's answer was something along the lines of, "We know everything. We just can't do anything about it." And that's kind of what Sally's role was here. Basically, she was roboticized. She was aware of her actions, but she could do nothing about it. She could do nothing about it. She was forced to say things she didn't want to say, do things she didn't want to do, but she couldn't do nothing about it because she was stuck in this robotic body. A robotic body that, she originally sacrificed herself to, unbeknownst, basically being unbeknownst to her, that was gonna, it was a body that was gonna get modified and weaponized by Eggman because he really wanted to mentally and emotionally mess with the freedom fighters. And again, these are all good traits, believe it or not, to make a story like this, interesting and interesting to a lot of folks and keep them invested. But after that, it just felt like it dropped off the earth. It just fell off. It just fell off and everything, and it just didn't pick itself back up. And had they done, like I mentioned, I know I'm repeating myself here myself. I know I'm repeating what I'm saying here myself. But had they done something like what Ace of Speed drew there in that link I provided for you guys in the live chat, had they done something like that, things would have been more interesting. Things would have been more, you know, um, more interesting and more like okay, guessing and speculating for fans, going like, okay, what's going to happen here now? But it never happened. It never did. And when I hear Cyberpunk Jordan in his video a couple months ago saying this was the worst mistake they made, it essentially was. I mean, if I look at both Fantastic a video on it and Cyberpunk Jordan's, both of them make good points. Both of them make tremendous points. And in the end, in the end, basically, you can kind of sense a subtle agreement between the two. Even though the two have never contacted each other, just hearing what their own opinions were, you could hear a subtle agreement between the two that this was not a good idea. That at first it started to turn out to be a good idea, but then it fell off. It's like I said before. It's like you have this blueprint, of a plan to, make something, to build something. And even though the blueprint makes your idea look grand on paper, look impressive on paper, that the end result could be totally different. That the end result could be, less than enthusiastic. And basically that's how you have to look at the Mecha Sally arc. That's how you have to look at it. That it was basically, on paper looked great and everything looked grand, as a story, but that over time the end result ended up being anything but. The end result ended up, being anything but that. And I think, and I think honestly, Ian Flynn realized that and tried to make up for that in the Metal Virus arc with IDW. But again, he fell into his own vices, and those vices are basically, start out strong, start out in a way that gets people's attention, get them invested and interested, but over time fall off the cart, if you will. Basically, the wheels start to fall off, they start to break apart, and they can't be replaced. If if you kind of understand uh, understand the saying there, you know. But basically, that's how the Metal Virus arc was compared to basically when it comes to the storytelling, very similar to the Mecha Sally arc. Basically, it started out good, got people's attention, got them interested and invested, but the wheels fell off, throughout, and they couldn't put them back on. They couldn't replace them or put them back on. And again, just like with the Mecha Sally arc, the blueprint, for the Metal Virus arc made it look good on paper, and again started out good on paper, but the end result, when it was all said and done, was less than stellar or impressive. And again, and once more, I believe this is all because Ian Flynn wanted to create his own magnum opus, if you will, his own magnum opus. That's what he wanted. And look, there are there are certain stories. Okay, there are certain stories in comics, in the history of comics, in the history of novels, movies, television shows, animated or live action. There are story arcs that you can do. Okay, there are story arcs you can do, but not all of them have to be magnum opuses to be great. They don't. And none of them have to be basically something that you want to use to prove that you can do just as good, if not a better job than the person before you. Sometimes you just gotta go with what brings you to the dance. And Ian Flynn's a great writer. Don't get me wrong. I read what he's done with the My Little Pony IDW comics, and he's good. He is definitely good. When it comes to those stories. But when it comes to Sonic, and it comes to stories like Mecha Sally, and it comes to the Metal Virus, these are story arcs that even though the idea was probably good on paper, the execution just did not, you know, the execution just did not result in something that, you know, is going to be looked at as classics, going to be looked at as masterpieces because of the repetitiveness, the rinse and repeat that went through with them, throughout, their entire run. And it just, in the end, it just feels like it basically felt like a slog fest. And look, are there going to be people that were fans of it, fans of these stories, even 11 years after Mecha Sally began and a decade after it ended? Are there still going to be people out there defending it? Absolutely, and they have a right to, because again, it started out good, and maybe there was some stuff throughout it that they enjoyed. I'm not saying there wasn't. I'm not saying there wasn't, but the point that I'm getting at is, basically, you could already tell in a way the direction he was going with the story. As I mentioned earlier, if Archie Sonic Online is anything to be, believed and accepted as a continuation of the original continuity, just like Team Season is trying to make Season 3 the continuation of the cartoon Sonic SatAM, if any of that is to be believed, then we already know the direction he would have gone with Sally. We already saw it. We already saw it, or could see it. And heck, he did kind of touch upon that. What was it in what was it, 258? I think it was two. See, 253, 54, 55, 56, 57, right? What was it, 258? I believe. I think it was 258. So he he knew. He knew. Well, not he, but we, I should say. It's early and late. I do apologize. I'm doing this before I can get some rest. Um, but anyway, he knew. Or we knew, and he knew that we knew, if you will, what the direction was going to be that he was going to go in. And because he couldn't do it originally the way he wanted, we get to, I think, 257, to 258, I think. Let me double check here, guys. I do apologize for lag again. Um, but what is it? No, it's not that one. Let's see. It's see. Yeah, it's this one. It's 257, I believe. Yeah, 257. Um, but yeah, he obviously wanted to go in a different direction. Well, not a different direction, but in a direction that you know had Sally dealing with the PTSD that she was going to deal with in the original story. But because of the behind the scenes situation, he had to basically change things up, and he only could touch upon it just briefly in 257 because of that scene she has with Nicole, where she's like, I've got to take responsibility, or Nicole and Cream, I should say, by basically saying she has to take responsibility. She's got to be the one that makes sure everything is taken care of, because she's got to make sure, she makes, because basically her intention before Nicole snapped her out of it was, she has to make up for everything she caused, or, in the previous life as Mecha Sally, because, what Eggman did to her. And Nicole has to snap her out of it and say, don't do that now. That's in the past. You are here now. You are the Sally that was an inspiration to the likes of Lupe and Dulcie. Don't fall apart on us now just because of something that happened in a previous life. And that's enough to snap her out of it. But again, and I know I sounded like I rambled earlier, again, we as fans knew pretty much where, Ian was going to go, which is why Archie Sonic Online is doing a great job in touching upon that in the recent issues. Because they knew where he was going, and Ian Flynn, I think, kind of knew that we knew he was going to go in that direction, which is why he decided to put that little tidbit into 57. But but overall, though, it it just the Mecha Sally arc felt like it was just something in the end that, only really didn't need. And I've said this before. I've said this before. Didn't really need to go the lengths that it did. I mean, the fact that one of the original plans that obviously they were going to stick to, despite other ideas being tossed about and then, thrown in the trash indefinitely, the initial plan agreed upon across the board by everybody that worked on this was that 250 was going to be when she got restored. And then they were going to take the next 50 issues to rebuild the Freedom Fighters to finally have, I guess, one last confrontation with Eggman Robotnik before maybe the comic ends around 300. Who knows? But obviously, that was the agreed upon overall plan, that at least, she was going to be deroboticized by 250. Um, but that never happened because of the lawsuit. But in the end, though, it didn't have to go as long as it did. I mean, honestly, they were gonna. I mean, here's the thing: having it go for 20 issues. 20 issues of the main book. Interruptions aside, because of promotional reasons put down by Sega. But for about 20 issues of the main book, and about 4 to 8 issues of the Universe book, and you're looking at basically 2.5 years of story that didn't need to go that long. I mean, if you want to do it, Ian Flynn should have, and I've mentioned this before as well, and others have touched upon it too. Ian Flynn should have easily, and I mean easily, taken a page out of what he did with Iron Dominion. If he would have taken a page out of what he did with Iron Dominion, even previously, with the idea, with the story arc of the Moebius invasion, the King Scourge Moebius invasion, if he would have taken ideas from both those stories and had this arc just go for at least eight to 12 months at most, 8 months to a year, then I don't think anybody would can be complaining about it. I don't think anybody looking back on it now would be saying, "Oh, it started out good, but then it became a bore, and it made no sense in the end." Da 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 da. Nobody would be shunning it. If he would have just said, "Hey, I'm gonna go 8 to 12 issues, and that's it. 8 to 12 issues of the main book, maybe 2 issues of the universe book, and that's it. That's it. Or 2 to 4 issues of the universe book, and that's it. 12. Basically 14 to 16 issues in total, all between both titles. If he would have just done it that way, I don't think anybody, not Fantastic Fantastic, not Cyberpunk Jordan, nobody, not Mega Beatman, nobody looking back on it now would be saying that it had the story had potential, but in the end fell apart. You know, fell apart. At the wheels, and they couldn't be, and it couldn't get those wheels back on. So to me, to me, if he would have just done something like that, I don't think anybody would be complaining. Be honest with you. I don't think anybody would be complaining about it. Nobody would be looking back on it about a decade later and basically saying that this not only was one of the worst arcs they could have came up with, worst ideas they could have came up with, and one of the darkest ideas. They would actually probably be, you know, saying more positive stuff about it. I mean, yeah, they'd probably touch upon some negative that would be in there, but they'd still be mostly more positive about it because it didn't run for that long. Because within that, 8 to 12 months of the main book and the four additional the 2 to 4 additional issues of the universe book, you basically are able to get from point A to point B to point C and be done. You're able to get from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3 and be done. And that's it. And just go from there. And for Sally as a character, you use the rest of the run of the comic for her to learn from her mistake. Like, if they have to deal with something similar like this again in the story, she could be like, you know what? I'm not going down there because I know that if I go down there, I'm going to get turned into a robot again. So we got to figure out something else. In other words, make it a learning experience for her. Make her realize, like, okay, I'm not making that mistake again. So we got to route something else. We got to figure something else out to prevent, this situation, this robotization of the planet or this land or whatever from happening. You basically make it a learning experience for her so she doesn't make the same mistake again. And that's what you could utilize, the following, issues for. That's what you could use the following issues for. But he didn't think of that. He did not think of that. Instead, he decided, hey, I'm going to try to make this my magnum opus, just like he tried to do with Metal Virus and IDW. And although it started out good, it fell apart at the end. And he knows it. And he knows it. So, if I'm you, Ian Flynn, or if I'm anybody else that works on the IDW Sonic comic in the future, if I'm any of you, my advice, you want to do a story like this again? Just stick to the average, I would say 8 to 12 issues of the main book, and you'd be surprised at how more well receptive a story like this will be. Don't try to make something into your version of Endgame because you think you can do a better version of something dark and dreary and dramatic than Ken Pender's. Don't try to make something that you feel is going to be your interpretation of Flashpoint or the death of Superman or the Phoenix or Dark Phoenix sagas. Don't try to go there, guys. Don't try to go there. Try to be your own people, and if you know your audience like you think you know your audience, then keep things simple and short and to the point. Don't try to make something, don't try to make something, that's beyond your control. And also, you do, and also if you try something like this again, my advice, do some research. Do some behind the scenes research and do some proper planning because if you end up going through a similar situation behind the scenes that you did with Archie, then once again you're going to be up you know what creek without a paddle. So if you want to do something like this again, two things. Shorten it to only 8 issues, 8 to 12 issues, and also, secondly, do proper planning and research so that you're more well prepared for anything that may come out of the woodworks, if you know what I mean, or unexpectedly. But yeah, you know, but yeah, it's still just looking back on this, it's especially at this time, it's hard to believe that it's going to be 11 years since this idea of a story came out. This, in my opinion, waste of an idea came out. Because if you were gonna do, like I said, if you're gonna do something like this with a character like her, then at least have her do more than just the rinse and repeat stuff. Have her do more. But they didn't do that. They didn't, and it's cost them in the end. It cost them. Maybe not immediately, but over time it has. And that cost is at the fact that even those that wanted to support it and get behind it look back on it now and they're like, yeah, this may have not been the best of ideas. Especially when they saw what you were doing with the Metal Virus arc and comparing its links in storytelling to Mecha Sally. Yeah, they could kind of see exactly why this probably wasn't a good idea. But hopefully, again, you learn from your actions and just just try to do better. Just try to do better next time because Ian's Ian, you and your team is you and those you work with are great. Are a great team. You're great writers. You're great artists. But you can't be taking on more than what you can handle, especially if you're working on other books. You need to limit yourself so that you can get your idea out there, but not in a way that's going to piss off a lot of fans. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Um, but look, you know, was it the best idea? Was I'll put it this way: was it the best idea? As I mentioned earlier, on paper, blueprints, and all that, it looked great. But the execution, even though it started out well, it just they just fumbled the ball. They just fumbled the ball, and they couldn't recover. It's like basically to use a strange analogy as an example. It's kind of like with Super Bowl 24. It looked like Denver on paper matched up well with San Francisco, and it looked like maybe we'd get a good game, but that all fell apart for Denver, right from the start. It's like, as soon as they probably got a little momentum, it fell apart, and San Francisco just ran all over them, in one of the more lopsided Super Bowls in history. And as strange of analogies that is compared to the Mecha Sally arc and by extension the Metal Virus arc, that's kind of what happened here. It's kind of what happened here. You know, Ian Flynn and his crew on both stories looked like they had the momentum behind them. Looked like they, could do no wrong. They matched up well. The story matched up well with what they were planning, drafting up. But the game plan and execution, when you know, basically, set in real time, set in real time, it fell apart. And just like Denver, they got smoked. True, part of it was not by their own admission. They had corporate interference from Sega, and then you also had the legal situation with Ken. But if, but again, if they would have executed better, worked out things better, I don't think they would be in the situation. They would not be in the situation that they ended up in when it was all said and done. And you have people looking down upon these stories. This one, 11 years to 13 years later. Well, not 13, but 11 years to 10 years, 11 years to 10 years later. 11 years since it began, 10 years since it ended. You don't have people looking back on this. You don't have people looking back at the Metal Virus arc about a couple of years later and saying and asking themselves, why in God's name did they come up with these stories when they had no real plan for, I guess you could say, a true outcome, a true, directive for it. So, like I said, what Flynn has to do, in the future, if he ever does this again for IDW, is he and his crew, E. Van Stanley, Tracy Yardlin, all of them, plan better, research better, and don't try to do more than you can handle. Only do what you know you can handle. And in my opinion, I think you can, if you want to do a story like this again, whether it's similar to Mecha Sally or the Metal Virus, limit it, limit it to 8 to 12 issues at least, or at most. 8 to 12 issues at most. And by doing so, you won't, you know, you won't sub- subvert, you won't subvert the expectations of your audience, and you'll be able to retain their attention, for the story a lot more, a lot more than you were hoping for, or originally when it got lost, when you just dragged it on with the same rinse and repeat stuff over and over again. Now, I will say this. Yes, as I mentioned, there were some interesting things. The weaponization, when that happened, that got a lot of people wondering what the hell did he do? Why would Ian Flynn have Eggman do this? And the excuse basically was her weaponization, once de-roboticized, would lead to, well, basically what you see on the screen right now. That new look. The clothes, vest, and shorts and all that. Basically the look we got in the reboot. That was going to be the end result. And that's why the weaponization happened. But still, again, you could have gone different ways with it. You could have. But, they didn't. And like I said, though, the weaponization did get people talking because it made people wonder, did Ian Flynn have Eggman gut her, basically take her apart and rebuild her? Or, in my belief, but as I mentioned before in a previous video, I'm kind of leaning towards more that directive of, yeah, he may have had Eggman gut her. My original belief was I think he just wielded on armor, and that's it. But again, how do you wield on armor, but then you also place a cannon inside her head, a laser cannon? Which again does have me lean more towards, yeah, he had Eggman in story, gut her just to weaponize her, take her apart. And it's like if you couldn't get the fans more upset than you did before. But again, I will admit it made things a little interesting. It got people talking. But then afterwards, it just fell apart. The whole story went down the toilet. Because where do you go from there? Where do you go from there? Especially if one of your answers is something from the earlier days of the comic that's going to basically be what brings Sally back to normal. And the fact that behind the scenes you couldn't actually decide, okay, whether or not the Sally that gets restored would be an auto automation sleeper agent or the real deal. Thankfully, I think they were heading towards the real deal, as I mentioned earlier. But I guess we'll never know. We'll never know unless Ian Flynn finishes uploading the behind the scenes works with his Lost Hitchhog Tales things on his form or on his website. But we'll see. But I think the overall lesson that has to be learned here for any writer currently in comics or any inspiring comic book writer that wants to work at a place like IDW, Archie, Dark Horse, Top Cow, DC, Image, Marvel. I think the lesson here that needs to be learned is if you want to do an event-like story, as one of your first major runs, then don't overexert yourself. Don't try to do something that people that in the industry that have been in the industry longer than you by years and decades Don't try to do something that they would do, as your first major story out of the box. Instead, take your time, research, what would gain people's interest and investment in your story, and also keep your story at a shorter length. Keep it like I mentioned to about 8 to 12 issues at most. If you want to try to make it a long deal, make it 8 to 12 issues at most. And if you're going to tie it in with other comics, make sure those tie-ins only last for about 2 to 4 issues at most. And that's it. Don't overexert yourself, because again, that's what Ian Flynn, in my opinion, him and his crew, and I know I'm not alone in this being agreed upon. That's what they could have done here. That's what they could have done here with the Mecha Sally deal. They could have had it run for 8 to 12 issues at most, with 2 to 4 issues of universe to tie into it and be done, and then use the other issues that came afterwards, storyline wise, for a character like Sally in her new look, like I said, you see here, due to her weaponization being the result of her getting a new look originally in the original ideas. Have the next several issues be a learning experience, a rebuilding experience for Sally, so that if they have to deal with something like this again, which I have no doubt that if Ian Flynn was still writing the original continuity of the book, at the time, they probably would be. Have it be a learning experience for her, where again, as I mentioned earlier, she's like, I made. She'll be like, look, I made the mistake before. I'm not making the mistake again. So I'm coming. We got to come up, or I got to come up with a different kind of plan that's gonna, save the world from, this possible robotization or whatever. So again, in closing, this basically has to be a learning experience, not just for Ian and his crew, but also for people that, like I say, want to get into the business or just starting out. Don't overexert yourself. Take your time. You know, do research. Figure out what people are more invested in. Or what will make them invested in your story and intrigued in your story. And also limit yourself to only eight. If you want to make it a big story, limit yourself to only 8 to 12 issues of your main book. And if you have to tie it in with some, spin-off books or tie-in comics, limit that tie-in to 2 to 4 at most in the tie-ins, and that's it. That's all I think you should do. But in the end, guys, like I said, in the end, it's just hard to believe it's been 11 years since the Mecha Sally arc started, and next spring, April and May will mark a decade since it ended. It's hard to believe, and basically to mark this occasion, as you see here now on the screen, just like you saw at the beginning, you have fans talking about it all across YouTube about how well it started out, then fell apart, or how it was the worst mistake Archie and Ian Flynn ever made. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you on this. Thank you all for joining me for this live stream early this morning on Sunday, April 13th, 2022. And good morning to everybody, like Brandon, Looney Tunes 2000, Looney Tunes fans 2000. Thank you for joining. I wish you guys could do super chats and all that, but I have to wait another couple of weeks to see if that gets reinstalled, due to the fact that my monetization was taken away. But it's understandable, why that happened. But anyway, though, guys, thank you all for joining me. Really appreciate it. Check me out at my Teespring store, where you can find some Sally merchandise, Raleigh for Sally merchandise there. Also, some new MLP related merchandise. You can check it out there at my Teespring store. Also, check me out at BW Rosa's Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations, where you will get an audio version of this eventually when the time is right. Also, check me out at deviantart.com, so that's BVW1979. I got a couple of new stuff uploaded there. Also, check me out at my Patreon at patreon.com, so that's BW Roses, with the $1 and $3 tier. $1 tier gets you a shout out, $3 tier gets you a shout out, and the first to see content before it comes onto YouTube publicly. And I am still working on the idea of doing a Q&A Patreon for $5. I've yet to make that a reality. I'm still thinking about it, so stay tuned for any announcement on that in the future. Also check me out at VENMO at BW Roses for content you can't get here on YouTube. Also check me out at Venmo, or support me I should say, at Venmo at Brian-Romer-2 and at Cash App at BW Roses 98. And hit that subscribe button and notification bell button to know when my content comes out or any other future live streams occur. So anyway though guys, that's all I'm going to say on this. Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate it. And until then, check out Fantastic Samtastic's video on this on his channel, as well as check out Cyberpunk Jordan's video on it as well. You will find, and I'll probably add those at the end here. You'll probably find those very, very interesting. So until next time, guys,